Morning Year 12. Firstly, congratulations on finishing your first SOR, Year 12 SOR assessment task. I am marked Section 2, so the second question looking at changing patterns of religious adherence. And I've just finished marking them, and you won't get the marks back until next year, but at least I can send out some feedback identifying things that should have been mentioned in the responses and things that could have been improved, just so you can get that quick response or quick feedback, which can be helpful in improving your responses. So the question was based on this stimulus here, looking at changes in identification, belief in God, and attendance at worship from 1993 to 2009. And this had to be referred to in your response. But I just want to make it really clear that if you look at the bottom of the chart, the source is actually the International Social Science Survey Program for Australia. And so this, if you're thinking about this in regards to data, this is not census data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, and that will make sense when I come to that later. But if we look at the question, with reference to the provided chart, discuss the changing patterns of religious adherence in Australia from 1945 to the present. Now in regards to, with reference to the provided chart, to get full marks, you need to make reference to the actual chart. And what I mean by this is you need to refer to it in a meaningful way and not just for the sake of it. So the two ends of this are, one, you just mention the chart in your response. That is not actually making a sophisticated reference to it. So don't do that. Or two, the other far end of the spectrum is that you base your whole response around the chart, which means that you just describe what's on the chart. And either of those is not a sophisticated way of making reference to the chart and making meaning from it. So essentially, the focus should not be the chart, but rather the changing patterns of religious adherence. And from that, you then use the chart to support what you're talking about. Moving on to the directional term, we have discuss, and discuss is providing a range of different points of information to a subject matter. And the subject matter for this question being the changing patterns of religious adherence in Australia from 1945 to the present. So this means that you're not simply describing what has happened throughout Australia's history from 1945 to the present, but you're bringing forward different points of view and different experiences or different patterns. You've got to use language such as furthermore, on the other hand, in addition to, similarly. Different bits of language like that are creating a flow in your response, but also bringing forward the idea that there are changing patterns, that you're changing the topic, but you're adding on to information at the same time. Now, the meat of this question is this: the changing patterns of religious adherence in Australia from 1945 to the present. And that needs to be the focus of your response, not the chart, okay, but rather the changing patterns. Now, a lot of you may have noticed in your responses when you get them back that, excuse me, that I made reference to the idea that you had a good response, you had a good discussion, but you needed to ground your knowledge in census data. Now you might be asking, why does it need to be census data if it's not actually explicitly mentioned in the question? And that's fair enough. But the thing is, if you know your syllabus well, which is down here, you will know that in the Students Learn To section underneath religious expression in Australia, it specifically says, outline changing patterns of religious adherence from 1945 to the present using census data. Now in the HSC, they cannot ask you anything that's not from the syllabus. And I guarantee you that if they ask you in the HSC a question around changing patterns of religious adherence in Australia from 1945 to the present, they will expect census data to be used to show that changing pattern. Okay, so you could not have got full marks in this response without using census data. And I just want to make that explicitly clear now. Now, in regards to changing patterns, you needed to identify firstly what changing patterns of religious adherence exist in Australia during this time period. And then you need to go beyond that and actually discuss those changing patterns. Not describe them, but discuss them in a sophisticated way. And as I mentioned before, you then need to support your knowledge of changing patterns of religious adherence with census data. And if you didn't do that, you couldn't have achieved full marks. So that's the analysis of the question as well as the chart. And what I've provided here is these are actually 2 student samples that, from just the assessment task that you guys sat. I've made some changes, and I think they're very well written for the students, so congratulations. But what I've done here is I've highlighted different things in the response according to this key. So anything in green is using the language of the question. Anything in blue is making reference to the chart. Anything underlined is their own knowledge. And anything in yellow is census data to support their own knowledge. In regards to the green one, before I start, is a lot of responses didn't use the language of the question whatsoever. And if you're not using the language of the question, you're not showing the marker how you're answering the question. And I think that's a really simple thing that needs to be corrected or worked on to make sure that your response is a bit more sophisticated and a bit more clear to the reader. Okay, so I'm going to read through these. I'm not going to analyze them too much because I've already done that through the color coding. And then what I've done in the PDF I've emailed to you is I've just taken all the coloring off if you want to read them without the distraction as well. So, here's sample 1. The patterns of religious adherence in Australia from 1945 to the present have greatly changed as a result of immigration and the rising influence of secularism. Since colonisation, Australia has traditionally been a Christian nation, with approximately 87% of the population identifying as Christian in the 1947 census. Despite this, according to the chart from 1993 to 2009, the number of Australian adults identifying with a Christian denomination has decreased 20%. The lifting of the White Australia policy in 1972 led to this changing pattern of adherence, whereby immigration increased, and as a direct result, Australia's religious landscape transformed from a monofaithful society to a multi-faith one. This changing pattern of adherence is supported by the growth of non-Christian religions in Australia, such as Buddhism and Islam. According to the census, Buddhism has risen from 0.8% in 1991 to 2.5% in 2011, whilst Islam has increased from 0.9% in 1991 to 2.3% in 2011. In addition to the drop in Christian adherence, according to the chart, the belief in God, which has decreased from 63% in 1993 to 47% in 2001, can be accounted for by the influence of secularism, leading to the rise of no religion in the census. The influence of secularism is most notable in the rise of the option of no religion in the census from 12.9% in 1981 to 22.3% in 2011. Therefore, as a result of the rise of immigration and the influence of secularism, the patterns of religious adherence in Australia from 1945 to the present have changed dramatically. So as you can see, the language of the question has been used very clearly and is always pointing to a new point of discussion. The chart has been referred to in a sophisticated way, but not over the top. There's a lot of their own knowledge, and also there's a lot of clear census data to support their own knowledge. So I'm going to read the next sample, and I want you to think about the same thing as I'm reading it. Think about the language of the question being used, what reference to the chart has been made, is there their own knowledge, and is there census data being used to support that? So from 1945 to the present, Australia has undergone changing patterns of religious adherence. The provided chart shows the overall decline in the belief of God and attendance of worship, but also 70% of people identifying themselves with Christian domination in 1993, decreasing to 50% in 2009. Although Christianity remains the dominant religion in Australia today, it has experienced major decline, most evident in the 26% decrease from the 1947 census to the 2011 census. This changing pattern was due to the abandonment of the White Australian policy and the influx of migrants and their diverse religions. The rise of non-Christian religions in Australia 2.6% in the 1991 census to 7.3% in the 2011 census mirrored the slow decline of Christianity, which emphasises the establishment of a diverse religious adherence in Australian society. Furthermore, as a consequence of the rising influence of secularism and New Age religions, a representation of Australians has moved away from traditional religions, most evident in the rise of no religion in the Australian census from 12.9% in 1991 to 22.3% in 2011. Thus, the changing patterns of religious adherence in Australia from 1945 to present have changed significantly. So as you can see, they're slightly different the way they're written, but both of these received 5 marks because they hit all the points. They provide their own knowledge. They answer the question using the language of the question. They make reference to the chart in a sophisticated way and not over the top. but most importantly, they use their own knowledge and support it and ground it in census data. I hope this has been helpful, and I hope it does give you clarity around maybe why you got the mark you did, if you're happy with that. Also, if you weren't happy with the mark completely, maybe where you could have improved on that. The main thing, guys, is that with Year 12 already knocking on your door, it's already begun, and as you start to get into it next year, these are moments where even if you are happy or unhappy with the mark you got, these are the great moments where you need to really recognize areas of improvement and work on that, but more importantly, areas that you did well in, and make sure that you continue to do the same there. But the most important thing is in Year 12 is to be kind to yourself, especially around assessment tasks and when you get marks back, and think about areas of improvement always. Anyway, I hope you have a lovely Christmas, all of you, and a great New Year, and make sure you find a healthy balance during the holidays to do some work, but also spend time with people that you care about, and see you in the new year. Thanks.